so much. Hello, good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to all the participants. Welcome to the panelists. The discussion is going to start right now. This event is taking place in both in Zoom, and it's also being live streamed in YouTube, as well as recorded for people who cannot be with us today. I want to start by thanking to the panelists and participants for joining in this conversation to explore the universal basic income potential to deliver economic security and gender equality. The purpose of the event is to continue in this global debate and highlight the structural changes needed to achieve economic security and gender equality, which means economic security for all. As we all know, the socioeconomic impact of COVID-19, the crisis is being very hard, impacting on women and girls, is worsening the pre-existing inequalities, and this is now more urgent than ever for UNDP. Measures that could potentially accelerate these efforts are initiatives as the one that we are going to discuss today, as the universal basic income, or guaranteed minimum income. There is a range of measures. So socioeconomic responses to COVID, to the impact of COVID and the previous poverty gaps needs to include gender equality, needs to include women. Now is the time to imagine, dream, and implement a new path for societies. So this high-level discussion is going to explore from the diverse experiences of the panelists, cutting-edge research, but also practical examples of how can this be a reality for all citizens. I wanted to introduce you very briefly the second Vice President and Minister of Social Rights and 2030 Agenda, Pablo Iglesias. Before this position, he was European parliamentarian in Spain, Secretary General of Podemos since 2014. He was also lecturer at the Complutense University of Madrid. He holds 2 master's degrees in political science and communication and a PhD in civil society and collective action. She has published more than 30 academic papers, so very warm welcome to Mr. Vice President Pablo Iglesias. We have with us also Dean Carlan, Professor of Economics of Finance at Northwestern University. He is the co-director of the Global Poverty Research Lab and founder of Innovation for Poverty Action. This is a non-profitable organization dedicated to discover and promote solutions for global poverty problems. So we are also very lucky to have Dean, Professor Dean Carlan. He was also Professor of Economics at Yale University and Princeton University and has a range of very impactful publications. Welcome. We have Kani Winereja, UN Assistant Secretary General as Assistant UNDP Administrator and Director of UNDP Regional Bureau for Asia and Pacific. Kani brings over 25 years of experience and practice within the UN nations, missions in a range of regions and countries, and serving Asia and Pacific right now as the leader. But also she was serving in Africa and her quarters. Ms. Wiyanjara is economist and specialized in development economics and public administration by Princeton University. So, and we have the most special guest, that is Aruna Roy, Ms. Aruna Roy, political and social activist who co-founded the Workers and Peasants Strength Union in India. In 2011, she was named one of the 100 most influential people in the world by Time magazine. And in September, India Times listed Ms. Aruna Roy as one of the 11 human rights activists whose life's mission is to provide others with dignified life. So we are very lucky to have her on board. She was also a member of the National Advisory Committee set up by the government headed by Sonia Gandhi, and she is the national president of the National Federation of Indian Women. So warm welcome, Miss Aruna Roy. And finally, I will introduce you to my colleague, George Gray Molina. He is the UNDP Chief Economist of our Bureau, Head of Strategic Policy Engagement. And also before this position, he was the Chief Economist in Latin America and headed a think tank in Bolivia for the Ministry of the Presidency. He is the lead author of Multidimensional Progress and the range of publications. So very warm welcome, George. And before starting, I will clarify that participants will have the opportunity to raise questions during the event. Participants need to send the questions writing via Zoom application. And please, we invite you to indicate to whom the question is addressed. Without further ado, I give the floor to George Molina. He will give opening remarks. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Raquel, and good morning to everyone. It's truly a pleasure to deliver these opening remarks on behalf of UNDP. I wanted to give a warm welcome to all of our distinguished panelists. I'll keep my comments short and sweet. I'll focus on three key issues. First is the intersection of gender equality, social protection, labor markets, and basic income. The way that we are looking at transformation and change at UNDP is to think about the architecture of policy and how basic incomes can fit into that equalizing architecture. And I'd like to address the elephant in the room, which is time and history and the difficulties in shortening the gap in labor participation rates, in reversing segregation-based occupation, gender-based occupation, reversing many of the salary gaps and many of the differences in burden between paid and unpaid labor between men and women. We know that all of these take time because we focus on institutions, on social norms, on power. But history has also taught us that there are moments in history in which there are shortcuts to be had, in which there are opportunities to accelerate progress, in which there are leapfrogging opportunities. And we think that this might be one of those windows in history in which we can think of leveling the playing field with new instruments like basic incomes, like a UBI, like other levers in our policy architecture that will take us forward. So let me park that first idea there. The second idea is how to think about UBI in the context of many measures and what we call the family of basic income measures. So this can be everything from a guaranteed basic rent, a minimum income, a topped up social protection program, a UBI proper, a temporary UBI, stakeholder grants, earth dividends, and so on. So the family of basic income is large, but it shares three components that we think are important. One is the normative view, the view that we should move beyond and transcend the lottery of birth. And in UNDP, we're committed to a rights-based approach since 1948. We believe that everyone has equal social and economic and political rights beyond the place of birth, beyond even citizenship, because we are all human. This normative position, interestingly enough, has been shared by many on a large continuum in the political spectrum, starting from Friedrich Hayek in the 1930s from a libertarian position thinking about basic incomes, all the way through John Rawls in the 1970s thinking about theories of justice, and implausibly including Richard Nixon and Milton Friedman in the 1960s and 70s with negative income tax proposals and basic income proposals. So we think the normative position is very important. The second issue is to think about fatigue with means testing. And this can be administrative. This could be the fact that targeting creates a lot of exclusion errors, but there's also incentive issues that keep people out of the labor force because of the way that we target social protection and social assistance policies, and also because it speaks to a view of citizenship. And we need to start to think not as an equation between rich and poor, but rather as what does an equal society demand? And we believe that a social policy architecture that has all of these elements, social protection, labor market policies, basic incomes, is part of that architecture. Let me move to the third point and share some of the work that we've been doing here at UNDP, because we've taken inspiration from the here now. And as you know, we're going through an unprecedented crisis. Many countries are addressing this crisis, proposing different varieties of basic income guarantees. We will hear the very interesting case of Spain soon, but there's also proposals on the table from Singapore to Colombia to Brazil. Let me share just 2 slides that we've been proposing here at UNDP that focus on a temporary basic income proposal. I'll ask Ezgi if I could share the screen, please. All right, let me continue. What we've done with a colleague from King's College London, Eduardo Ortiz, is to do income simulations for 132 countries. And we use the Spanish model as a guide, thinking about how to top up incomes for people who do not receive either social assistance or social insurance. And what we find is, of course, that the costing of such a temporary basic income for all poor and vulnerable households in the developing world will lead us to a package that is equivalent to the debt standstill for 12 months of external debt of the developing world, which is $2.9 trillion this year. That's how much developing countries will pay this year in debt service on capital and interest. And we find that 12 months of a basic income at $5.50 per day for 3.1 billion people is equivalent to that 2.9 trillion debt standstill. We think this conversation is already on the agenda by the UN Secretary General to think through options and think through basic incomes as a global public good. Let me finish here. We're delighted to have all of our distinguished panelists. We think this is a very opportune, important moment for us to rethink the social policy architecture through social protection, labor markets, and basic income. And we were very happy to share our own experience. So thank you for your kind attention. Over to you, Raquel.
Thank you so much, George. And as soon as we can fix the screening, I will find a way to give you 2 more seconds, because I know you have been working very hard on this and on the presentation. So now I will give the floor to Professor Dean Carlan. As I said, he's the President of Innovation for Poverty Action, and which has led research on the longest running experiment on UBI in Kenya for running for 12 years. The result of the experiment will be published soon, but I have a couple of questions for him. And the first question is, could you tell us about the evolution first of UBI debates, and where are we now? And I will go to the second question, but let's go one by one. Thank you. Dean, over to you.
Sure. Hi, and it's good to be here with everybody. UBI is not something new, right? It's something that's been gaining a lot of attention, but as we just heard, there's a long history that even goes back a couple hundred years of discussions about this kind of policy. I think there's 3 reasons why we're seeing a resurgence of interest in UBI today. One is perhaps the most obvious, and it's why we're all sitting here on video rather than in a room together. It's because of COVID, but specifically what COVID has really heightened and kind of made poignant to everybody is really making it obvious how interconnected this world is, and how health issues, which do affect lots of people who are maybe not part of your daily life, still affect your daily life. And that's both through health as well as through economic impacts. And so it really has kind of heightened everybody's attention to this recognition that doing something to help make sure that the world can survive issues of this nature, where disasters help happen for some people and it has these ripple effects that affect everybody, need to be dealt with. And UBI is a way of helping in that kind of helping to lift up all boats, so to speak. The second and third issues are not specifically related to COVID, but are just really heightened issues today. One is about inequality. We are seeing higher levels of inequality than ever before in the world. Those levels are higher both within country and across countries. And the countries which are most equipped to be doing something like UBI are the countries that have high inequality within the country. To deal with the issue across country obviously requires international aid and reflows. But even within country, when you have a set of people within the country that are doing very well, and a set that are not, that's a prime situation where a UBI policy does make a lot of sense. We'll get I know later to kind of pros and cons. The third issue that has become more and more poignant these days and is, we have seen a huge push around the world for lower trade barriers. And as an economist, there's one of the few things that most economists agree on is that trade in general is good. And when two people can make a trade, or two countries or two firms can make a trade, then and both are willing traders, then they're better off. But one of the things that we're realizing slowly, and a lot of policies are picking up around, is the recognition that there's transition costs. And when you do see a shift of industry from one country to another country, or one region to another region, that some people do get left behind. And it's not so easy to just snap your fingers and find a new job. And so UBI in a lot of situations is about trying to help smooth a lot of those transitions that happen both within country as well as across country. So those are some of the kind of historically what's been happening recently to really rise attention and bring back UBI into a conversation.
Thank you so much. This was very pedagogic for all of us, as we are reopening all debates and we need to know where do we come from. So the second question, Jean, is based in your findings, in the findings of the lab, what are the pros, the cons, what have you learned? Even though I know the report is not yet released, but you have a very, very deep experience leading on the topic. So if you want to share with us.
Happy to. And let me be clear, I'm not, I literally do not know what the results are from the Kenya study. So I'm speaking here about the evidence from other contexts and other studies, because there have been studies of UBI for many, many years. And there's a lot of other things that are in the zone of UBI. So first I'm going to just answer your first question though, about just what's the good, what's the bad, what's the debate? And I'm going to sound like an economist on one hand, on the other hand, on the other hand, on the other hand. So we have, basically, two really big pros to highlight. One is the simplicity and this simplicity is actually made even simpler because of some of the technological innovations we've seen blossom over the past 10 years with mobile money. Implementing a program like UBI 20 years ago wouldn't have been as easy in most contexts, but now actually does have a more viable path to very simply rolling it out. We've been working extensively with the Togo government for the past month, who rolled out a massive cash transfer program as part of called Novisi, as part of COVID relief effort to help informal workers in Togo. And they did this entirely through mobile money, and they implemented it incredibly fast and incredibly fairly. And so that's the second point, is fair. So it gets to the heart of the word universal, and there's a lot of debates about the word universal, a lot of wiggle room, I think, in the way people talk about what they mean by universal basic income. It's striking to me though how often the U is not taken as seriously as I would think it should be. It's not called SBI, some people basic income, it's called UBI, universal basic income. So what do we mean by universal? It really, it should be pretty close to everybody. And you might think to yourself, well, why should we transfer money to, say, Bill Gates? And the answer is very simple. It's politics. And that's about taxation. If you are paying for it through taxation. So if you end up transferring money to people who don't really need it, but it makes it politically feasible, then do it. And also, if it's truly universal, then you don't have to target. It's much easier. There's no effort. There's no to figure out who gets it, who doesn't. And that actually lowers the cost a lot. So I think there's a lot of reasons to really take that use seriously. So those are the goods. The bad one is obvious. It is expensive, right? It is a long-term commitment, because otherwise it's not basic income. It's just a one-time cash transfer. And if you really want people to be able to absorb that money and treat it like true income, and then do things like make investments, improve their home, and start enterprises, things of this nature, they need to have confidence that it's going to be coming around for a while, not just be a short-run thing. And so that's a budget issue. I'm going to get back to that in the final point I want to make about the politics. The second main negative is one that is very much in our space of kind of the desire to get evidence. Everything I've said so far is more not so much about evidence, but about practicalities and operational and thinking through the trade-offs. But in terms of evidence where something could go one way or the other, the big issue has always been labor supply. Will transferring money to people on an ongoing basis make them say, well, now I don't have to work? And so if you transfer $1,000 a month to somebody, do they then just work $1,000 less that month, and then they don't have any more income? And meanwhile, you've done this whole big program and done nothing. So that's the big debate from an evidence perspective, or one, the biggest debate. Fortunately, on this, the evidence actually looks quite good. And very, very consistently across many, many cash transfer programs that have been done, we do not see that kind of cutback in income. And part of that might, there's some point to be clear. If you transfer enough money, if it's a lot of money that you're transferring, you presumably will start seeing that. But so far in the cash transfer programs that have been done, that are sizable and important and make a difference in people's lives, and you can see the evidence on that, we do not see a cutback in labor supply. In fact, in some cases, we actually see the opposite. In Ghana, I do have a study of a project that's a cash plus study, where we actually see labor supply go up as a result of getting the transfers, that it enabled people to then take on new opportunities and new ideas, and they worked more. So that's the big evidence debate, and that's, I think, the main, if there's one data point that everyone wants to look at from the studies when they come out, it's that, because that kind of resolves a little bit of the debate. So the last thing I will leave you with is just the main challenge, which is on the politics. I think the debate and the politics can be summarized quite simply. Is this as well as or in lieu of? Because you have a lot of excitement for UBI across the political spectrum, certainly in the United States. As you mentioned earlier, Richard Nixon came very close to passing UBI. In fact, he was ready to sign it. My memory of the details was that it got through the House and then failed in the Senate because they were debating the size of the transfers. Democrats wanted them larger. Republicans got nervous about this labor supply issue, and they couldn't find the compromise. But it came very close to passing, and he was advocating heavily for it in many instances, although waffling as well too. But the as well as in lieu of is a really important issue. And the question is it as well as health insurance, as well as housing policy, as well as education, or is it in lieu of? You just transfer this money and then it's up to people to what to do. And the answer to that a lot comes down to markets. If the markets are really good in a place, then there's a strong argument to say, yeah, that's fine, just transfer the money and then people can buy what makes them best off. But if markets are not really good in a place, then that doesn't make any sense. If you can't just take your income and go buy education and go buy better healthcare, then it doesn't make sense to hand someone cash when they can't buy the things they need. And so there's probably a very slightly different answer in terms of where you want to be on the spectrum of as well as to in lieu of, and that should probably depend on the country and the level of market integration for buying the kinds of things that we want, that people are going to want to buy with this income. And so, so that does push us in lower income countries to being supportive of UBI, at least from a philosophical perspective, assuming the evidence comes out the way the evidence that is out is consistent with, but wanting to see it integrated in with an as well as model, so that some of the other things that people need who are really struggling the most and most hard hit from economic woes are still able to rise up, build enterprises, build livelihoods, get access to healthcare and things of this nature, and UBI can provide a cushion to give them some level of freedom over and beyond.
So thank you, Dean, for the rich answer and for reminding us that UBI is not only technical, it's political, it's very much about the social contract that we want and we are looking for as society. And the politics are at the center many times of these decisions and investments. So the last question for you is very relevant for us, and is, what are your conclusions on the contribution of UBI to gender equality, reduce gender inequalities, and women's agency to the economic autonomy of women? Thank you.
So here there's some very practical ways of rolling out any sort of cash transfer program to try to do things to help women have more control of the money and more power within the household and within the community. The evidence, unfortunately, is not as strong as we'd like it to be, and we need a lot more work to figure out how to actually do that. We've seen programs, for instance, that transfer money, empower women, transfer stop, power goes down. So changing power is a tricky thing. And yes, economics can play some role in changing power, but also some of that comes from social norms, and that comes from might not come from some cash transfer policy, but will come from public campaigns and from public awareness and working with leaders to change the conversation and listen more about struggles that people are facing. And understand how this plays out for children and households. So some of that is outside the space of what UBI can possibly accomplish. But what we need to do is just see more experimentation on this and more innovation to try to figure out how to make it work. But we've seen some success. I've seen some programs, for instance, some programs that I ran that were cash plus models, where they were cash plus a lot of services as well to try to lift people up. Saw them empower women. At 2 years after the program was done. 2 years later, the women had more power. 3 years later, less so. So
thank you.
There's a give and a take, and the question is, how do you make these things last so that you actually have true social change?
Thank you, Dean, for your answer, and we will continue the conversation at the end. For sure that Aroa will have many things to say. I want now to go to the second panelist, Mr. Second Vice President of the Government of Spain, Minister of Social Rights and 2030 Agenda, Pablo Iglesias. So, as we all know, Spain has recently approved a minimum vital income to fight against poverty that can be claimed as of the 15th of June. It guarantees a minimum income threshold to all citizens, and it is estimated that it will benefit at least 2.3 million people. So, and the Vice President will explain much better than me, but we know that it will also target survivors, for instance, on gender-based violence and victims of sexual exploitation. And we know that in Spain, single-headed households are almost represent, women are 90% of these headed households. So my first question for you, Mr. Vice President, is, in order to better understand the reach and relevance of this measure of the minimum vital income, could you please describe how poverty and inequality have evolved in your country? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Raquel. Good afternoon in Spain, good morning in New York, I think. Thank you, George, Kani, and Dean. I've been hearing you very carefully. I really would like to put on my head the academic hat, but unfortunately I have to wear the hat of a politician. As George said before, the main issue in order to talk about poverty and the minimum vital income, the elephant in the room is the COVID-19, and I think this is a very interesting context in order to understand even the decision that our government and our parliament have taken yesterday. I have to say I'm very happy. Yesterday, the Spanish parliament approved with a great majority the minimum vital income. For my political party, this is very important when we born 6 years before the minimum vital income was probably our most important proposed very attack in my country. So regarding your questions, the global pandemic of COVID-19 has provoked an unexpected health, social, and economic crisis in Spain and overseas in all the world. However, this crisis has only become a mirror of the serious problem that already affect our societies and especially poor people. The pandemic has called into question the current social, economic, and financial model of our society. Now, I think it is quite clear the need of rethink everything, rethink the political and economic decisions taken in recent years, and especially those related to the 2008 crisis that have developed into a progressive aggression, in my opinion, against the welfare state. The crisis generated by COVID-19 make us even more aware of the need to undertake structural transformations in our economic and social model. Agenda 2030 represents our roadmap and political action framework. Agenda 2030 is not just a pin, a very famous pin in my country between politicians. Our commitment as a government with the Agenda 2030 has been proved with the creation of a Vice Presidency of Social Rights and Agenda 2030, which I have the honor to occupy. Faced with a terrible situation and being aware that many problems affecting Spanish citizens are structural, are not a problem of these months, our coalition government, a leftist coalition government between Podemos and the Socialist Party, has adopted and implemented urgent and long-term measures aimed to fight poverty and inequality, measures that improve social protections and guaranteed what we call social shield to leave no one behind, to face this crisis. Yesterday, we approved this new benefit, the minimum vital income, that is not universal, is a starting point, but it's not temporary, it's permanent, as I'm going to explain to you. For us, this is a new social right in Spain. This is a way to create the fourth element of the welfare state, social services, and in this case, a new subjective right, a new social right. From the point of view of social protections, and especially in relation to the fight to eradicate severe poverty, I have to say to you that this is a historic decision in Spain. In that sense, I really would like to thank you, the NGOs and civil society that have been fighting for years in order to put in the politicians' agenda this issue. This is not a victory of the Spanish government, this is a victory of civil society. From now on, we can say that the citizens of Spain will be protected as never before against a sudden loss of income like the ones happening as a consequence of COVID-19 crisis. Let me tell you something about asking your question, Raquel, the recent evolution of inequality and poverty in Spain. In 2008, before the economic crisis, our country already had a very high level of population at risk of poverty and social exclusion, but it was practically the same as that of the European Union as a whole. Spain was not different in this sense. Since then, however, this figure has grown very, very fast in Spain. So that in 2014, it reached 29.2% of the Spanish population, while in the European average did not reach 24.5%. These numbers reflect how deeply the crisis affected countries of the periphery of Eurozones, countries like Portugal, Spain, Italy, or even Greece. But they are mainly the consequence of the wrong policies of fiscal austerity, salary adjustment, and the reduction of rights promote, and I have to say this, even if this is not beautiful for the European institutions, promote by European authorities and apply by the Spanish government back then. The result was that Spain became the European country where inequality increased the most in this period, and probably this is the reason of the burn of my political party in Spain. It is true, I have to say that, it is true that just before the COVID-19 health crisis, Spain was undergoing a recovery process in terms of GDP growth and job creation. There was a real improvement in the numbers of poverty and inequality. However, the low growth in wages and the low quality of these new jobs made Spain continue to one of the most unequal countries in the Eurozone. And we are the fourth economy of the Eurozone. So this is not acceptable to have these numbers. This situation reflects, as I was saying, the consequences of the mistaken macroeconomic policies applied in my country during the previous decades, but also the weakness of the Spanish social protection system. And this is something that the new government, we are trying to change, even with the problems of the COVID-19 crisis. The total spending of social protection in Spain is low in both relative and absolute terms if we compare our country with the European Union. This is due to the fact that social transfers are concerned basically in pensions and unemployment. This type of benefits fundamentally protects those who achieve more or less a stable position in the labor market, but they have difficulties to cover those people who can hardly integrate into the market, or those who are working in precarious jobs. In particular, gender pay gaps mean lower amounts of retirement pension and unemployment benefits received by women. This is a reality. This also affects many young people because they discontinue and precarious jobs and the lives without any future for these labor conditions and precariousness they live. The protection of these lower income social groups in Spain, especially children in a situation of poverty, had been partially ensured through a system of minimum incomes developed in the regional authorities. As you know, Spain is almost a federal territorial system where the comunidades autónomas, the regional governments, have a great power, especially regarding health, especially regarding education, and also regarding social services. Despite some great experience, for instance, in the Basque Country, the income guarantee systems needed to be corrected, especially the coverage for population at risk of poverty or exclusion. From the first moment of the crisis generated by COVID-19, we knew that the response should be exactly the opposite of that one adopted in in the 2008 crisis. The priority of our government has been to avoid the closure of companies and the loss of jobs with the ERTEs. I don't know how to say ERTE in English. We have tried to build a social shield, as I said before, to protect the income and to protect the companies in our country. And just to finish the answer this question, Raquel, for us, the fundamental part of this strategy has been to accelerate the implementation of the minimum vital income. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Mr. Vice President, because as I said, unless we know where do we come from, it's difficult sometimes to understand the context that we are responding to. So this was very useful to understand the decision of the government of Spain, and I value also the recognition of civil society as the drivers of this decision at some point. So my next question is, if you can, and I want to, before going to the question, remind participants that they have a box at the bottom of the screen where they can write questions. And I see a couple of questions, very good comments. So please join us and enrich this conversation. The second question is, if you could explain the main characteristics and expected effects or results of the minimum vital income. Thank you.
Thank you, Raquel. As I was saying before, this is not a universal income, but it's a permanent income. So we establish throughout all the Spanish territory an income floor guaranteed to everyone who meet minimum requirements for residence in Spain and age starting from 23 years or 18 years old when they have children. Once this right has been secured by the central government, the autonomous regions can complement with their capacities and their power this income with different incomes at the regional levels. This level of guaranteed income is initially set for a person who lives alone, but is increased by 30% for each person who is part of the household. This will have a significant effect in my country, reducing child poverty. Another important characteristic of the minimum vital income in Spain is that the benefit is compatible with other income, even the salary in some kind of jobs or temporary jobs. This is very important in order to avoid the trap of poverty. So the Spanish minimum vital income is compatible with having a very bad paid job. Another main characteristic of the minimum vital income is that it establishes a very low conditionality to receive it. It is only linked to not having sufficient income, and the duration of the benefit is indefinite while the situation of need lasts. This safety net will be permanently available to those who need it and will they need it. And finally, special attention has been paid to make it easy to ask, so and accessible for the majority of the people, because as you know, sometimes people, when they see themselves in front of bureaucratic problems, it's very difficult to apply for a benefit like this. So the whole process can be done electronically. It will require a minimum amount of documentation, and the government will make the necessary checks in order to make the minimum vital income very easy to apply. Thank you.
So thank you so much. I think it is clear, and there are, I can say, many questions coming to the Vice President about this measure that we will ask you later on. Now, I wanted to give the floor to Ms. Kani Winarjara, and I also have concrete questions that link the universal basic income to the social contract. So, Kani, we know that UNDP and other international organizations, civil society have reacted not only to emergency responses, but we also are framing COVID as an opportunity to build back better. So my question for you is, and we know you have here a strong background. Do you think that universal income may have the potential for a renewed social contract and a new economic paradigm toward gender equality? Thank you, Kani, over to you.
Thank you, Raquel, and thank you to my fellow panelists as well. I was listening with great interest, and I will pick up some of the issues that you raised as well. So if we take the fundamentals of a social contract as ensuring equality and justice and trust between a state and its people, then we've got to look across the countries of the world and say, well, is that really happening? And particularly, is it happening for women? So in the majority of countries, women still earn less. They are able to save less. They own less assets. And they have lower paying jobs. There's greater violence against women, and so on. So where is this social contract? And can a universal basic income address all of this? No, it can't. So it has to be part of a larger package of effort and instruments and a much deeper dialogue on these. So I want to take three particular issues that the panelists have brought up. And one is time, right? We can't wait anymore. It's been hundreds of years since these issues of inequality and injustice have been around. And yes, there are moments of crisis that this conversations really come up to the fore, and this is one of those moments. So we can't wait this out, and this is the time to put in place a UBI and many other instruments that have to go along with it. Now, markets are imperfect in most countries that we work in. So to reflect on Dean's point, given we do not have perfect markets, let's say for education or distribution of assets, land ownership, for example, we can't wait for the market to do the right thing. So there has to be also a set of instruments that address and help to correct for imperfect markets. Now, on the issue of universal, it is true that this has been defined differently, but one thing is for sure, women have gotten the short end of the stick in every society in the world. Mm-hmm. So I would say, why don't we call it UBIW, Universal Basic Income for Women? Because you give women the money, they're going to use it. We've seen the research on this across North and South, that you will see improved household well-being. You will see schooling for children improve, nutrition improve, and the basic health and happiness of societies improve significantly. So maybe there is a way to target what we speak to of universal basic income and link it then to a much more robust social contract that's real also for women and girls. Back to you, Raquel.
So thank you so much, Kani. It was music to my ears, what you are right now saying about a universal basic income for women, because we know that women are the most excluded. And then another layers add to the exclusion of gender, right? Like rural and many other categories. So thank you. My second question for you is, given your experience in Asian Pacific and Africa, what do you think are some necessary fiscal measures to cope with the costs of universal basic income, both for developed and developing countries, but in general. Thank you. Over to you.
Thanks, Raquel. And I think Dean made a very good point in saying one of the negatives or what governments often say is we can't afford it. But we have a very good example that Vice President Iglesias put on the table, that after a debate that the Spanish parliament did pass this with a significant majority. And we have a number of countries around the world, again, North and South, that have taken up different variations of this instrument, but basically to say everyone has to have a modest basic flow from which you have to then, and it hasn't, all the research shows it does not disincentivize the labor market, right? People continue to go to work. In fact, it adds jobs because it has a ripple effect that is seen so far. And we're seeing this in countries all over Asia now, a large number actually looking at this and looking at the evidence that goes back quite some time of examples, whether it's India, and I hope Aruna speaks to also some of the state differences in India. It's very interesting to look more deeply at the kind of mix of package, for example, in Kerala that has been often touted also in terms of the impact on gender equality and women's empowerment. Kenya, Dean brought up a very good example, but we see this in Pakistan, Singapore, Iran has recently also introduced, and this is, I want to make a point here when you speak to fiscal issues. So Iran introduced it, and at the same time phased out some of the subsidies, including on fossil fuels. Now, in the majority of Asian countries, we spend more on fossil fuel subsidies than we do on basic income measures, or certainly on social protection. And so when governments say we don't have the money, we've got to look at where the money is going in the first place. We've got tax havens to look at, tax competition. We've got a number of ways in which money just leaves the shores through illicit financing flows. So often it is not about a cash flow issue. It's about redirecting purposefully and intentionally the money we've got and making the right choices in terms of the fiscal space that countries do have today. Back to you.
Kani, this was also very solid, as very solid answer about the need for redirecting, not only redistributing, redirecting into the right direction, right? So I wanted to ask you the last question, and we are running a little bit out of time, but I wanted to also give all the time that you need to each of you and be fair. So the last question for you is do you think really is universal basic income something to be considered by governments for COVID as a response for economic recovery, socioeconomic recovery? Is in this context, do we have, governments will have the time to discuss, approve, because sometimes you need a big advocacy, you need, well, what do you think is the scenario that we have under COVID? Thank you. Over to you.
Currently, Raquel, the political conversations that are happening right now, again, across North and South, I have to say, has really heated up on this issue because we've seen such tremendous job loss, right? And in countries in Asia where the informal sector is such a large part of people's livelihoods, to have millions of people out on the street, they're going to die of hunger before they die of the virus. So governments cannot afford to, this is not about political ideology. This is about saving people. And governments cannot afford to say, well, let me think about this for another few years. This is something that is right up front now as a set of choices that have to be made and have to be made really quickly. So we are seeing large fiscal stimulus packages coming through. We still very disappointingly see that it's a very small percentage of those packages that go into various social protection mechanisms. And again, one should look at local context to see what's the best mix in that country that would work. But this really is a time, and that's why for UNDP, it is a call to action to really speak to those fiscal stimulus packages and say, where is the money going? How can we also protect more of that fiscal space to put it into areas that matter, which is to both help with the base economic needs of people, but also very importantly, that it protects basic dignity and well-being and respect. And I think that is as important because this sense of injustice is even more powerful than being poor. Back to you.
So thank you so much, Kani, for this answer that make me feel very proud of working for UNDP. So yes, that's a goal for us. I wanted to be very vigilant and go to our next discussant, Ms. Aruna Roy, that, as I said, she is a political activist and founder of Workers and Peasants Strength Union and president of the National Federation of Indian Women. So I would like to ask you for your reaction to the previous presentations, Aruna, and reflect on the universal basic income more broadly from a rights-based perspective. And if you wanted to share with us your views on from the social justice campaigns, women's grassroots movements and feminist movements calling for right to work, right to have a livelihood, right to have pension bottom up in India. So the question is more like we are looking for knowing from you, getting some ground, no, some root in the people that is outside and leading with COVID. So it's very special, as I said, that you are with us, and I see many questions that you cannot see because that's the system, that are about women unpaid care work and are about how can we link this unpaid care work to this basic income and connect both sides of the economy, unpaid care work economy or care economy plus. But over to you, Aruna, and thank you for joining us today. We are very proud of having you here.
Thank you very much, Raquel. I'm also very happy to be with all of you. No one can argue the case of a basic income. I mean, today we can't really talk about the unimportance of a universal basic income. But I have a few things to say. Some of the speakers have talked about targeting. I think we must differentiate between a universal basic income, which is really universal, and the universal basic income, which is targeted. Because the income, there are all kinds of, and Kani has really stated many of these issues that are of deep concern to me. So I'll just refer to the fact that we are always told that there is no money for any of these things. But the point is, women will have to learn to look at fiscal allocations. We'll have to learn to look at budgets. We have to learn to look at what the governments are doing with our money. Because the slogan that we got that got us very popular in the early mid-90s was government's money is our money. So it's our money and it's our accounts. So we have a right to know what's being done with that money. And it applies absolutely specifically to the COVID situation. Despite all the sounds of approval for a universal basic income, we pressurized the government for at least for the few months in which COVID had put the workforce, 93% of India's workforce is unorganized, and many thousands and hundreds of millions of people were on the streets, the people who were on at work at other places or on migratory labor, which wanted to go back. And at that time, we asked for it, but nothing really happened. Why universal? As a concept, universal income must remain universal also because of the mechanics. Because in the mechanics of reaching that income to people, there are always the middlemen that touts the mafia in the bureaucracy, in the system, in the government, in social systems. And we still live in fairly /feudal /corrupt /unaccountable /power crazy /male dominated societies. So for us to look at the way that money will come to us is very, very difficult. Everyone says technology is a solution, but in the constantly for us in all the various campaigns, whether it was pensions, whether it was rations, whether it was access to any kind of funding for welfare, we found that we were marginalized also because of technology. Because technology is not the only solution. Technology has to be used wisely. It has to be used with integrity. And when technology is not used with integrity, you're marginalized. Many of my women friends were declared dead, and they had to go to Delhi, which is the capital of the country, to prove that they were indeed alive, to claim their benefits for various numbers and figures that are attached to their name. But one important thing that we've been talking about in social security and contract, yes, absolutely. It is a social contract that we should have with our governments. But in the process of developing a social contract, one of the most important things to understand is that who takes the final decision? Do I, or does my system take the final decision in that structure? In the case of a universal basic income, unfortunately, the entire decision-making process lies with the system. People don't have a say. The MGNREGA, which is the works program and the rights-based program that we have brought together in India, which has been working since 2006 in India. Today, there are 100 million people working in India on the NREGA. In Rajasthan, that's the state in which I live in India, in the last 2 months because of COVID, are people attending, demanding work in those programs. We demand work. Demanding work in those programs has risen double-fold. And we are now 5 million people going to work in Rajasthan. This kind of scale. And it's always been a case of a dole versus dignity. Whereas UBI is seen as a dole, work is seen as dignity. It's my right. I demand work. And therefore, I deliver. I contribute to the economy. I contribute to the system. I contribute to my village politics. I contribute to my child, my family, my system, my community, everything. So when, as 40 years ago, I traveled widely in India, everywhere in rural areas, talking to so many people who were workers, and they all wanted work. When you ask them, what do you want? What's the most important thing you want? They didn't say we want money. Of course they want money, but how? How do they want the money? Through work, because it's dignity. They kept saying, you give us the money and we look after ourselves. You give us work, the work will give us money, and the money we spend as we wish. So we don't want a dole, we want work. Now that's an important thing that we must keep in mind. And is it not possible for us to think of how we can look at decentralization? Because one of the most important factors against women's political and economic power is that we are always in these huge, massive edifices, and we are all local, small, in smaller units, in smaller village councils, in smaller, various kinds of political and economic and social units. So therefore, decentralization becomes critically important. And one of the ways, Kani mentioned Kerala, one of the ways in which Kerala has really dealt with this is empowering their local women who formed the small women's groups called Kudumbashri, which really started taking important decisions. And with the devolution of finances. So money was not left in the hands of the people at one point. Money was given to the people to decide. And there was also some amount of fund which was given to them to decide how to spend. So the education for democracy, the education for empowerment for women will come only when we can link UBI to a rights-based program. And we argue that if we can link it to a rights-based program, UBI can be an extremely powerful way of dealing with empowerment as well as dealing with finances. Because one of the major arguments of all governments is that we have no money. So we say UBI provides the money, and working provides us dignity. And in the NGNREG, we have the right to demand work anytime. And within 15 days, the government has to give us work. If it doesn't give us work, then it is fined, in our words. The way we define it is that it's fined. It has to pay us with money sitting at home because the government didn't provide us work. Eventually, they are also subjected to public scrutiny. So we can demand to see the records, we can demand to see the financial allocations, we can demand to see the work implemented, and we can do a public audit. And in that public audit, in front of the local politicians, the local power structures, we can demand our rights. So what has happened is a fusion of both rights and money being allocated is a phenomenal thing. And every time there's criticism, of course, because there's corruption, we've rooted out some part of it, but there's still much of it. So every time when corruption surfaces and anyone goes there and says, let's get rid of it, huge protests. You simply can't touch this. This is our law. This is a law we've made. This is a law which we demanded. You can't take it away. You can't touch it. So that kind of political clout and economic power, the NGNREG has really provided us. The other thing I would like to point out, it's happened in India. I don't know where else it's happening. Labor laws have really gone the way of all flesh. In fact, in India now, they have increased in many states in India, post-COVID and during COVID, have increased the number of hours from 8 to 12. So workers can be made to work for more than 8 hours, and you cannot protest. So in a sense, all the basic workers' rights have gone. If you can't fight for workers' rights for hours of work, then how do you fight for minimum wages? How do you fight for all the other rights that follow? And I think one of the things that is important and critical through the NGNREG is that it's always been an alternative bound for the present by a law and a legal entity and a legal entitlement that we cannot be made to work for more than 8 hours. We cannot be made to be paid less than the minimum wage, at least technically. Whatever the NGNREG wage has to be paid to us. So it's important for us to understand. And this law doesn't let us unionize. So the new labor laws have struck it unionization, which is fundamental to the workers' right in a democracy to, is their only lobby. It's through the union that they'll represent their rights. And in our case, that is gone. And one very important thing is that NGNREG has brought back again the concept of unionization to people who have been the most vulnerable. The women from very poor families who understand that if they stand together, they succeed. If they don't, they fail. And that's the small clip I brought with me, I sent to you. If you have time, do share it with everyone else. The other thing that's important is that in the case of UBI and NGNREG, we are arguing, should extend to the second phase, where we include services. So far, it's only work. It's work to produce assets in the rural areas, to use water, to protect the water sources, to protect agriculture. But it can be also used for services. If COVID prolongs, then we need healthcare, we need compassion, we need people who will do services. And Kerala, again, has shown the way by saying that they can use some part of their funds to provide these to their village entities. And this has been a long-standing argument of women who have been fighting this. And in any case, in NGNREG, in the national scene, 50% of NGNREG workers are women. In the case of Rajasthan, 70% of NGNREG workers are women. We have empowered them in the last 11 years to stand on their feet, to call the shots, to earn their money, to have bank accounts, to understand the use of money, to demand that their children go to school, children's attendance in schools, and everything else has increased just as much one would have wished for to any other system that we might promote. And actually, our final argument is that in today's world, economics and politics are bedfellows. You cannot talk about economics without talking about politics. And so women realize how important it is for them to talk about democracy, to talk about constitutional rights, to talk about equality, the right to fraternity, the right to liberty. And all those concepts become real concepts for them And when they stand together, they feel the power of it. And our slogans bring them to life. Thank you.
So yeah, thank you, Aruna. This was very inspiring, but also not only inspiring, touching the specifics, the concrete challenges, and many aspects, like as you were saying about universal basic income, that is not only the implementing side, is about democracy, is about transparency, is about accountability, is about getting non-state social actors like unions. So you were touching really a very realistic picture that talks about including anti-corruption, that is at the center of efficiency and many other issues, and the need to have a systemic approach, right? I wanted to give now the room to people that is writing questions. And I have the first one to the Vice President, Pablo Iglesias. Pablo, what impact do you expect from the minimum vital income on the economy, society, and gender relations? Because as Aruna highlighted, and also Kani very strongly, there is no possibility to disconnect politics from the economy, but also from inequalities, and at the center, gender inequalities. So, what impact do you expect for the country, for Spain? Thank you.
Thank you, Raquel. I'm going to start with the end, gendering, but I really would like to thank the work of the Ministry of Gender Equality in Spain. We have a Ministry of Feminism that give us, creating this law, a gender perspective that is very important in order to understand our minimum vital income. Regarding access requirements, some special circumstances are contemplated for groups such as victims of trafficking, sexual exploitation, or gender violence. For us, it's quite important to understand that this measure needed a gender perspective, especially if we take into account that the poverty has always a face of woman, and the poverty for women is always more serious than for men. Regarding the economic point of view, obviously, it's stupid to make a difference between politics and economies. Is the same thing. I think it's very important to understand that minimum vital income is not just a question of social justice. It's just a moral, or just a moral element for poor people. But it is very useful in order to get the reactivation of our economy, especially after the coronavirus crisis, because each euro in transfer to lower income households has a multiplier effect in the economy, because everything is destined to buy things, to acquire basic elements. So the money the state is spending in the minimum vital income does not go to a bank in Switzerland. It's go to consumption. So it's very important for companies and for the reactivation of economy. And regarding the social impact of the minimum vital income, for us, for me especially, is very important the results, the outcomes we spend regarding child poverty. Around 1.6 million people will come out of severe poverty in Spain, and many of them are childs that have this opportunity to give these childs more expectation or more opportunities in order to get education, life opportunities is very important for us, because this social right is especially for them and thinking about them. I would like to make a last reflection, if I can, Raquel, about this tension between politics and economy. In the past, and when I say in the past, I'm thinking 4 months ago, before the COVID-19 crisis, the difference between left politicians and right politicians could be neoliberal economy or neo-Keynesian economy. I think now, and this is probably the most important debate in the European Union, all Democrats are neo-Keynesian. Why? Because in a moment like this, in a moment that in many aspects remember the 29 crises and the reconstructions of Europe and the States after the Second World War, now the intervention of public sector is something essential. This is something that is not in discussion in order to get the recovery of the economy. And the minimum income, the minimum vital income, is probably a great example of that. It's something very important in Spain, and something that was wow for many people, that reference for right political traditions were saying, okay, this is a good measure. We support, we agree with the minimum vital income. I think that we have created now in Europe, but not just in Europe, a new international consensus on the need to get out of this crisis with expansive policies and not anymore with austerity. So I think that the debate now is completely different respect the debate we had after the 2008 crisis.
So thank you so much, because this last point about how the boundaries between the neoliberalism approach and more social welfare approach are now not as clear as before, because COVID highlighted, as you said, Vice President, how relevant is the public sector to ensure from food security to health to even education to. So is a great and very strong point what you are highlighting, how this is an opportunity right now for societies. It's an opportunity to live on our back the austerity measures and this kind of understanding of how to recover better. So thank you for bringing this point that is very, very important. I have another question that is for Dean and is also very relevant. The question is, there is an argument that UBI, by remunerating care work through cash transfers, can perpetuate the gender division of labor and encourage women to withdraw even more from the formal economy. So what do you think? What is your take here? Thank you.
So, I mean, this is, I think, one of the reasons why I would never suggest that UBI or any sort of cash transfer program be the end all, and needs to be part of a, kind of more holistic thinking about social policy.
Okay.
And, issues like what you're addressing are important and can be dealt with by complementing whatever it is being done with UBI with other programs and services to facilitate access to labor markets for women, which is a problem around the world. But then that's where you add on programs that do that kind of access. And so then the two might complement each other and make it viable. So, right now, suppose that suppose you provide some access to labor markets for women right now without a cash transfer program. What happens? Well, it could very well be that the woman says, well, look, that's great. A job sounds good, but it's risky. I don't know. Maybe the job won't be good. And meanwhile, I have my kids. I need to take care of them, and that's my, I need to do that. But if you provide cash transfers, then they could, and there's actually a market. This is part of my point earlier about, the cash being good, if there's good markets, to then buy childcare services. They can use that to buy childcare services and then go to work. Right now, if you're in a situation without access to childcare services that you can buy, handing a woman cash and saying, hey, go buy childcare services, and they go, well, I don't understand, where's the yellow pages? How do I find that? Like, that doesn't, that's a joke for the older people, the yellow pages. Then that's a case where, no, it doesn't make sense to provide cash, just assuming they'll come up with a way of buying childcare services. You need to actually have perhaps a universal childcare service program. And then that can work. So, you have to understand what's going on in the local context or markets to think about this. And whoops, I guess I don't need this right now. And then, in order to be able to take into consideration exactly the points that you're making, because this is absolutely critical. We do not want to see unintended deleterious effects.
Thank you so much. Indeed, that's the answer. No, UBI cannot be an isolated measure. So I go quickly to the next question because there are many and very interesting, and it is for Kani. Kani, the question is, given the significance of the parliament roles, and we can see this even right now, right, with the example of Spain. Well, do you think that organizations like UNDP, such as UNDP, together with civil society, and in a country like Pakistan, whose economy is not strong, can do to support parliamentarians in ensuring this crucial legislation of UBI? Over.
Thanks, Raquel. For UNDP, given that the mandate on supporting institutions of governance is at the heart of what we do, and we support parliaments in, if I recollect, over 100 countries around the world. That's a really good question, because it also directs our attention to the essential role of Parliament in defining this space. So I would say there are 3 areas that we would like to take on and consider. Of course, it depends on where parliaments are in their own debate on this. But first, I think it relates to something Aruna said, that parliaments have a significant role to play on this concept of right to know, a citizen's right to know, and the issue of transparency of budgets, the Right to Information Acts, and those instruments, I think, are tremendously important, because to have any range of variation of UBI, the transparency issue and how this is implemented is very important. Related to that is the role of Parliament on oversight and tracking, because one of the concerns always is that this becomes a political capture, or it becomes an avenue for further corruption. And so the role of Parliament in really, and not just national parliaments, but also local councils, in keeping these mechanisms honest, I think is tremendously important. And the third in what we've been talking about is that it should come with other instruments, and countries where parliaments have, for example, promoted and supported very strong anti-gender violence bills. I'm taking one example, has been something, or a minimum wage bill, to take another example. These are things that also is critical, and for UNDP, we would look at it as a package in that country's context, and these would very much relate to countries like Pakistan, but many others as well. That was an excellent question. Back to you.
This was an excellent answer. Thank you, Kani. And I go to the next one. That is for Aruna. Let me find it. Aruna, how can UBI, and it's again coming back about unpaid care work, and that we all know that is, again, as I said, the center of inequalities, gender inequalities. How can UBI be fair when inequality in unpaid work persists? What can civil society organizations, government and international organizations do about it, about the package of unpaid care work linked to basic income. Thank you, Aruna.
The concept of care where women are concerned has always been that of a duty and an obligation. Maybe up to a point within the family, it's been so. But in a social context, I think care and welfare should fall into a framework of work obligations. So the nature of COVID has actually punctured this facade that we maintain of being blind to care work. Many people have now realized the importance of care work. In fact, Gandhi had talked about three concepts. He talked about charity, he talked about welfare, the charity and welfare, he talked about struggle, and he talked about the fact that you needed struggle, charity, and building, constructive work. So those of us who were in struggle did not think of charity as an important issue. But look at what's happening today. Today, most of Indian activists, struggles, people, parts of struggles and movements for democracy are all doing care work. Because without care, you cannot build the basic necessity of building that kind of trust, oblique social contract. Because trust in maybe individuals who facilitate the social contract, but the social contract is with the state. So how do you facilitate the social contract with the state? Unless you build up care as a part of that social contract. And therefore, everyone has an obligation to be part of that process. And in that, I think we build in this whole concept as an old revival of an older concept, but in a newer context. And I think it's important to see it that way. I don't know if I've quite answered the question that was raised, but I think it's just adjusting our lenses a bit and just tweaking our perceptions a bit. And then we see how valuable it is.
So I think you gave a very clear answer, and I wanted to also thank you. We cannot go through a second round of questions because of the time, and I wanted to be unfair and ask just one of you, because we have questions for all. I wanted to, before giving the final words to George Gray, to thank you all, and let me go a little bit more in our dream and think and think that maybe today is the beginning of an alliance, a global alliance between government, a lead government, like right now the government of Spain, with academia, with women's organizations, civil society, and with the United Nations. So this is the beginning. Let's take it as a first conversation that we will continue. I wanted to thank Mansoor Ndiaye, that is the team leader of Inclusive Growth, that has been my co-organizer, and of course my colleagues Aroa, Esgi, Ben, and because I said that because I don't want to forget. So George, over to you, and thank you so much. I learned a lot.
Thank you so much, Raquel, and thank you, dear panelists, Pablo, Aruna, Dean, Kani, Raquel again. I think this was a fascinating webinar. I just wanted to conclude with two ideas that sort of tie together what I think we've been hearing. And one has to do with compressing time and history. We won't be waiting 70, 100, 150 years to address gender-based inequalities, to think through the hard questions on systems of care, on social protection, on labor markets and labor incomes. So we believe we need to think about UBI, we need to think about basic incomes as an instrument within that social policy architecture that can push that frontier. The second idea, I think, is something that Pablo mentioned, which is how politics and economics and the spaces to make change possible have opened in this particular historical moment. And we know that that's been the case in the Depression era with the emergence of the welfare system. We've seen it after the Second World War. This is a moment in which many constraints are being lifted on the political, institutional, fiscal side. So we need to seize the moment. We need to have a long-term horizon to think through not just what we dream is possible, but how to get the sequence moving. So I think those two things are set in my mind. I think this is a great responsibility for all of us in the UN system, particularly at UNDP. Just wanted to thank everyone again, and thank Raquel and all of the team, the gender team, for such a wonderful webinar and such a great experience. Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.